Welcome to the On Your Mind podcast, where we are changing the mental health narrative, bringing hope and solutions. Here's your host, Timothy J. Hayes, psychologist.
John Kennedy is a #1 international best-selling author. He's an executive brain coach, a consultant, and a trainer, and he's helped organizations, leaders in business and the military exceed performance expectations for over 35 years. John's innovative insights have been featured in numerous publications, and he's been interviewed in a wide range of radio, internet, and TV broadcasts. John has delivered keynotes and workshops all over the world for a variety of industries and branches of service. John's unique approach to improving operational and mental agility has helped thousands of people with his combat brain training program. 100% of participants report significant improvements in performance in all areas of their lives. Clients include Marines, snipers, special operations forces and their instructors, pilots, professional athletes, business leaders, students, children with learning disabilities, and those suffering from brain trauma, including traumatic brain injury, post-traumatic stress disorder, and concussions. All of these participants have had their lives positively changed by the program.
Well, John, thanks so much for joining us here today. It's delightful to meet you face to face.
You too, Tim.
I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about how you got to be a neuroplastician and what drives your passion for that.
Well, great question. It's actually a little bit of a longer, probably answer than most people. It's interesting when I speak at conferences, one of the topics is called "Your Future is behind you." And so basically, if we look back at how we got to where we are now, it's often a very circuitous route, which mine was. So I started, my career had nothing to do with the brain when I started. I was a process re-engineering consultant, did a lot of project rescue work for senior level, C-level, the Motorola, Aon, AJ Gallagher, and it was all about defining processes critical to success, aligning the business around those processes. And we made some pretty amazing accomplishments, very quickly. It was based on a very, very fast approach. And then back in 2006, my brother came back from Iraq, my younger brother, David, one of my heroes, and with 2 Bronze Stars, Purple Heart. But he said the critical factor over there to our success was surviving IEDs, which are improvised explosive devices. Those are the ones that kill so much of our guys, cause so many casualties. And I thought, wow, man, if there's some way that I could possibly help in that approach, maybe I could do something, save lives instead of helping businesses make more money. And I was able, through some friends, to be able to talk myself onto an event that the Marines held every year out of 29 Palms, California, which is their largest training base. Marines like training bases with lots of desert because they can blow stuff up and not hurt anybody. So that was the location. But the whole purpose of this event was called IED Awareness Day, was to invite any contractor who might be interested in helping to a long weekend where they exposed us to everything they possibly could in a very short amount of time about IEDs. So we looked at thousands of different detonating devices. We looked at, they actually scared the crap out of us blowing something up. We had to go through simulated Iraqi villages so we could understand some of the stress the Marines were under. And so, Honeywell, Boeing, a lot of big guys were there, and they came up with better armor, better radio jammers, which was all good things. And I kept racking my brain, how could I help? And then on the very last day, I was shaking hands with the base commander, General Doug Stone, one of the smartest guys I've ever met. He'd already been a CEO several times. He was the Marine Corps' highest reserve officer at the time. As I'm shaking hands with him, I kept thinking about the guides who had led us through the simulated villages. All of them had survived IED blasts, and their consistent story was, I started going down this one street or this one alley. Something told me something was wrong, and I went a different way, but the guys behind me kept going, and they got attacked. And I'm trying to think, why do we have 2 Marines, similar demographics, similar training, similar ages? One has better what we would call intuition than the other. And as I'm shaking hands with Doug Stone, I just had this image, it's kind of this vision, God wink, whatever you call it. What if I could make the brain more efficient like I do operations, could we actually improve intuition? Could we anticipate, because our brains are more efficient, something happening? So I explained my idea to Doug. And again, because of his background, any other general probably wouldn't have gotten it. He said, yeah, let's try to make this happen. And so he helped me get a contract with Marines to see if we could possibly make a difference. During this time, because I want to learn about the brain, two very influential books that helped me. One was Norman Doidge's The Brain That Changes Itself, which I highly recommend to anybody. He goes all into the history of neuroplasticity, which is an incredible capability God has given our brains to change from stimulation. Everything we do, everything we repeat, everything we think, physically changes our brain to lean that way and starts to form ruts. And in fact, that's where the name neuroplastician came from, because Norm actually coined that phrase as people outside of traditional medical fields that develop ways to positively change the brain. And I've met some others that were actually in his book, done some amazing things around the brain. But to me, I needed to find a way to stimulate the brain in the areas critical to executive function. Those are the processes. I'm a process guy, right? That we wanted to improve. And at the same time, there was a book that came out. It's called How God Changes Your Brain. And the critical piece in that book was research out of MIT that's found that what they call robust stimulation will start to change the brain immediately. Now, I define robust stimulation a little differently than they did. To me, robust stimulation is stimulating those processes critical to executive function. At the same time, we stimulate the connections of the brain to the real world, right? That's why the digital programs like Lumosity and CogMed, you always get better at the games because of practice, but very minimal real world or far effect improvement. So I knew we needed to engage with the real world. And that also makes the brain work harder. And wherever the brain works harder, that's where the connections become faster and stronger. So embedded with the Marines for 3 months, that was we had 2 3-month engagements, the first engagement, but my approach to process improvement was assessment, development, and empowerment, right? We have to assess what the processes are existing and what the situation is. Then we need to develop the most efficient processes to accomplish what we want. And the final piece, empowerment, is to allow my clients to continue to get the benefits after I've already left. And so at the time, I needed a framework of cognitive skills that would be useful. Now, at the time, they were all psychology-based, which were pretty useless to a process guy. I mean, they're very good for psychology, but reasoning ability is not something that can be broken down. So there was a brilliant educator out of Australia named Dennis Jenkins, and he had developed a framework of cognitive skills that I could very easily translate into processes. So the very first contract was with 2 platoons of Marines. It was a big test to see if we could make an improvement at all. It was a completely, government overseen experiment. We had psychologists all over the place. We had observers all over the place. And basically we had a control platoon. So a platoon is 40 guys out of 1,000, which is a battalion. So we had a control platoon that was randomly chosen. And then the training platoon, our experiment, I asked for the worst platoon in the battalion because if we could do anything, I wanted to try to help these guys. So these guys had experienced a lot of trauma. They lost 16 guys a cycle before, a lot of post-traumatic stress disorder, concussions. 3 guys had tried to commit suicide, and they were failing most of their pre-deployment objectives, which were critical for them to be able to deploy again. So embedded with them, we didn't use Dennis's assessment, but all these different cognitive skills, started to develop the exercises. Now I knew they couldn't be digital. They had to be analog, right? Because we want to engage the real world. They had to be portable. They had to be simple to use. So with those requirements, we started working through different types of exercises to see if we could make a difference, but always getting back to the critical process of executive function. So 3 months later, the results blew us away. The second iteration for both groups of the cognitive skills assessment, the trainee group was significantly higher, but most important to me and to the Marines, basically, I'm coming from this as a consultant, not as a researcher, right? So research can go on forever. The Marines in business, if you aren't successful, you get fired, right? So we were so successful. The Marines were now the best performing platoon in the battalion, and they went to their final pre-deployment training back at 29 Palms. The instructor said it was the best performance he'd ever seen. At one of the IED specific courses, they were so successful, they actually found the IED, followed the det cord, and were about to capture the trigger man when the instructor said, "Oh, no, nobody ever gets that far. Go back to patrolling." And then when they went to Iraq, they were giving a 4 times the normal size area of operations and captured the most insurgents. So from then, I realized that I didn't need the assessments anymore because we already had what we were trying to develop. And I also worked on the empowerment piece. So my goal always was to leave the Marines with the exercises and the instructions so they could continue to use them without me. We created a Brain Games Olympics. We had a lot of fun with it, but tremendous results from there. Just by reputation, I spread to Marine Special Operations Command. And then from there, we went to Special Operations Command. So I've been able to train snipers, Navy SEALs, pilots, anyone you can think of on the military side. And what was very rewarding to me was almost any unit I worked with that had already deployed a couple of times, there was rampant post-traumatic stress disorder there. But they didn't, the Marines, they didn't want to leave their guys to get help. When I trained the special operation or special warfare explosive ordnance disposal group, for example, in San Diego, afterwards, this sailor came up to me and said, "John, I got to tell you how grateful I am. Before this, I know I have post-traumatic stress disorder. I've seen some terrible things in war. I did not want to lose my guys, but I was so angry all the time. I thought I was going to tear my unit apart. Now it's all gone. We get along. We hum along as a team. I make better decisions. I'm not angry anymore. I could not have done it without you." And I still hear from Marines and sailors and soldiers over the years. They'll send an email years later and saying how they still use it. So the cool thing for me is when we improve the brain, it doesn't matter what the brain does. You put a faster processor in your computer, it doesn't matter whether you're playing games or you're doing a browser, they're going to work better. And so now I'm very fortunate to be able to work with anybody basically who is willing, to go through the program. And that extends to dementia, Alzheimer's. One of my clients has severe amnesia. After 3 weeks, her doctor couldn't believe the improvements. At the same time, I work with very high performers like professional athletes and business people. I do a lot of work with families. So I'm very blessed in how it's changed, but every single person I've ever worked with has gotten better, improved, and it's very complementary to all the other excellent, psychological and physical training programs that are out there. I don't compete with anybody, but it kind of reinforces whatever they're trying to do as well.
So how do people get access to this program and your tools? Do you have a clinic? Do you do this all on consultation? What's the format?
Good question. So over the years, I actually, especially because of COVID, but even before that, most of the clients I work with is all via Zoom. So I have clients all over the world. And the exercises, the proprietary exercises, I can email them or send them to go through it. I have done it. I don't have a clinic. Part of the problem is most of my biggest pushback has been from the medical community. I've had several people that have made tremendous improvements and the neurologist won't talk to me. Okay, that's fine. Because they're all research-based, right? And so I just talked to someone the other day who has a cousin who has some serious brain issues. And according to all the scans, you should not be able to do things doing because that field is pretty much, and that nothing wrong with that, but they're all based on research. And one of the neuroscientists that helped me from Northwestern said that this could never have come from traditional research because research-based interventions are reductionist in nature. They're trying to find one thing that might possibly make a difference, where mine is very holistic. And about once or twice a year, I get to speak at medical conferences. And it always amazes me because people will say, well, in 10 more years, we think we might be able to tweak this one enzyme to make a difference. And I present results. From the consulting background, it's all about results. So I work with people in teams, families, individual, all via Zoom. I speak at conferences. I do large groups. One of the areas now that I'm starting to get some demand for is people who are returning to the office, from the whole COVID deal, right? So there's a lot of tension now because some people are working in person, some people are working remote. And when we do these exercises together, there's a powerful kind of a team building bonding that happens. So basically, I love to meet with people in person, but most of it is all remote via Zoom.
And when you talk about the exercises, you say you email the exercises to people, and then are you watching them do it while you're on Zoom? How long is a session or treatment or whatever?
Excellent. Right. So the exercises the first ones I would use, because I want to get started with people right away, it's just symbols on a piece of paper. So I can email it to them, they print it out and they go through it. But the key always in any kind of intervention, as you know, Tim, is it's not just the science, it's the art, right? So the science is the exercises. The exercises target executive function. Each iteration is a little bit harder because that's what makes our brain change faster, is continuing to work harder. Once we level out, the performance kind of levels out. And we engage all parts of the brain: eyes, ears, mouth, hands, feet. We want those connections to be faster. So the art part, though, is when I work with people, even teams, it's always about making each iteration a little bit harder, but never so hard they get discouraged. Now, a lot of things happen in the brain when that happens. So one of the things that happens is when you anticipate that something might be a little difficult, but you go for it anyway, there's a dopamine release, right? So this has been very helpful for people with depression and anxiety. And then endorphin release after you accomplish it. When you do this together with someone else, family, team, or a partner, you start to sync up your thinking. So that becomes very powerful as well. And probably the most powerful benefit is, again, what this neuroscientist said, that I don't know if your listeners are familiar with Kahneman's thinking fast and slow, but he kind of described two types of thinking. System 1 is fast and unconscious, and system 2 is slow and conscious. I have a little different take on that, but it's good for an illustration. And our neuroscientist said that when you do these exercises, we're actually optimizing system 1 and system 2 thinking and creating flow state. So some of your listeners may be familiar with flow state, big in athletics, big in music, but basically it's what we would call being in the zone. So we're doing things and all of a sudden we look back, they're all done, no stress. We're kind of in that magic area of the zone. We can actually create that with these exercises. And so typically the people I work with, the empowerment piece of what I do is after our session, I encourage them to practice on their own. One in particular, it's a 1 or 2 minute neuroprimer. So before a meeting or before sports or before anything, they run through this and they can get into a nice flow state and they're ready for whatever else is coming. One of my markets I work with are traders, right? Because they've got all this data coming up from the screen. And they'll always run through this exercise before they start trading. And if they have trouble getting through the exercise fast and smooth, then they know they're not ready to trade, right? So they'll go through it again. And once they're in the right mental state, then they'll start their trading. And they all say they make more money with less time. So that's a good thing for them.
So what's the length of time that you recommend people spend on either a session with you and or the trainings between sessions, and what frequency?
That's a great question. It's kind of customizable, but typically I meet with my clients 50-minute sessions. I always like a little extra time in the end. 50 minutes where we do the intense brain work and build on the one before. We always bring in whatever's going on in their world to make sure we address it. And then typically most sessions are spaced once a week, although I have some people that'll do twice a week. The critical time for the spacing is for them to have enough time to practice on their own. You know, it's like going to the gym, right? So if you want your trainer at the gym to do all the work for you, you go with him all the time. But if you want better benefits, you practice what he tells you to do in between. And so the best is at least 3 or 4 days in between so they can get in the habit of practicing, because with neuroplasticity, it's all about repetition, right? So if they repeat what they go through in the training with me on their own, then that means the next time we meet, we can actually step it up another notch, right? Because they've already lifted their baseline. And one of the things we do, which is kind of fun, some of the listeners may be aware, but speed of processing is a very important metric in our life, how fast we can actually process data. And so every session, I always start and end with a speed of processing test or drill. And it's amazing to see how quickly people's processing time gets faster. And that's another thing that I have them practice between our sessions, is to make sure, we call it a speed drill. Make sure you run through a speed drill anytime during the day, so you've done a few before you meet again.
So what's the typical course of either training or treatment for somebody who comes to work with you?
So again, it varies on the need of the people that I'm working with. So for high performers, we usually, it's like more of a coaching model. For people that are trying to recover from brain trauma, it's typically, I like to break the sets up into 5. So we meet once a week for 5 sessions. And there's a set program that I follow, but at the same time, I customize it for where their needs are. Now, most people after the first session already, I hear back from right away, are already noticeably thinking faster and more focused. So after that 5, we then step it up to some harder exercises for the next 5. And so it depends. The young woman I mentioned with amnesia, severe amnesia, when I started, her doctor thought she would never be able to be functional again. And now, after 3 sessions, she completely changed his prognosis, and now you wouldn't know that she ever had amnesia. Now, for her, we meet once a week. We actually then went to once every other week. So I've probably been meeting with her for about 6 months. Sometimes, because we always have a goal, right? High performers, they reach their goals much faster. Other people, it can take longer, but as long as we're improving, we continue to work. And that's why I try to get people through that first 5 sessions and then assess where they want to go from there. What it is, what's interesting, again, one of the fun things for me is people will notice things in their life way beyond what they're trying to accomplish with the training. Most people have a goal for the meeting. One of my favorites of that is a financial analyst I was working with. He's very overwhelmed at work, had just gotten a promotion. We had our first session on a Friday, and I expected to hear from him the following week that things were going better at work, which I did. But what blew me away was he sent me an email Monday morning, and he said, "Hey, John, I got to tell you what happened. I did your exercises Saturday morning. I got more done around the house by noon than normally would all weekend. And my wife now says that when she speaks to me, I'm focused on her. You're already in my home life. Awesome. I can't wait to get to work." Wow. So again, those are the kind of the effects we have. There's areas of our life that we're being held back. We're not even aware of them until we remove those roadblocks.
So is this scalable? Are there people other than you that are working with these tools and coaching people?
I actually just started a very good friend of mine, Tim Stewart. I met him when I worked with his girls' soccer team a few years ago. And he's a very accomplished coach. And we're meeting again later today. And my goal is to certify him so that he can go out and do this as well. So, anybody with a brain, and that's why I want people to have hope and encouragement, because anybody who's struggling, we can help. But right now it's just me. So my goal is to certify other people so they can either add it to their existing practice or go out and do the same thing that I do.
And what's the time that you would imagine it would take you to train, let's say, a social worker or a psychologist that wanted to learn this from you? What length of time would you say they would need to dedicate to training to be able to do what you do?
Yeah, so the first requirement would be that they go through that 5-session set so that they not only do they experience it, how it works, but also they get the benefits themselves, because it will make them a better therapist, it'll make them a better counselor, it'll make them better whatever else they're doing. Then we actually work out a customized program for their clients that work with. So it's not always necessary to go through those 5 if someone wants to add it to something else. So let's say there's a therapist that meets with their clients, once a week, whatever. If they were to add just 5 to 10 minutes of the exercises at the beginning of their sessions, then, their clients would be more focused, they'd be having fun, they'd be relaxed, and they would probably have a much better session going on. And that's the kind of thing I can certify someone to do. That's much easier than actually going through the full, all the work to be a full. If someone wanted to do this specifically, just this training, it would be much more involved. But if they're just adding it to help with they're already helping their clients, that's something that can be trained pretty quickly.
All right. Well, how long have you been working this program?
Well, it seems like Yes, yesterday. But that first engagement with the Marines was back in 2007. So it's been 15 years, and I've worked with anyone you can possibly think of in any area of life I've been able to work with. And fortunately, every single person I worked with has benefited. And probably an example of that are two people I'm working with right now. I don't know if some of your listeners might remember Coach Dave Wannstedt. He was the Bears coach a couple of years ago. He's in a Bible study with me. He said, John, my mentor, Steve Barley, is starting to get dementia. And so he referred me. I started working with Steve, been working with him for a few months now. And the dementia, when you get to the point of dementia, it's very difficult to reverse, but we can definitely slow the decline and make some inroads back. A couple of reasons for that. One, the training doesn't try to fix anything. That's why it's so universally beneficial. All we're doing is train the brain to rewire around any damage to do what we're asking it to do. The other reason it's so beneficial, especially for people aging, one of my friends who's a neuroscientist with the Martino Center at Harvard said, when you do these exercises, you're massively increasing the blood flow to the brain. And there's been a lot of research on one of the reasons we lose memory is because the capillaries that feed our neurons start to dry up, and then the neurons die. But if we are increasing that blood flow to all the capillaries, to all the neurons, he said we can actually create some neurogenesis, right? So very helpful for that. So I'm working with Steve. I absolutely love working with Steve and his wife. But then they just referred me to one of their people they mentor, Kat Perez, who is the goalie for the Colombia women's national team. And so she's the goalie, one of the top goalies in the world. They're competing for the World Cup. They actually just played the U.S. Was it Saturday night? They're playing the U.S. again tomorrow, if anybody wants to watch. Phenomenal young woman. And she's saying, even at her level, that she noticed improvements in her focus and her reaction time and so forth. So the encouragement is for anybody, wherever they are, wherever they're struggling, that we can improve their performance. Probably another one that your people might relate to is ADHD. You've done phenomenal work with that. A young 10-year-old boy whose parents didn't want him to take medication, and dad was really skeptical. Everybody's always skeptical, right? Sounds too good to be true. I understand that. And so we had our first session with the whole family, right? So the dad and the mom also got benefits. He's a banker, and I think she's a salesperson. But IJ was kind of funny. The very next day, his dad emailed me right away. He said, you would not believe the difference. At baseball practice, he listened to the coach. He did everything right. When he got home that night, he was bored. I told him to go read a book, and he read a book for an hour, even though his brother was bugging him. This is a young man who never would read for more than 10 minutes, right? So what we're doing is even though the exercises aren't designed to improve focus, in order to do them, you have to focus. So you're constantly training your focus, or selective focus, which is more important, while you go through the program. So people with ADHD, ADD, what we're doing is we're actually giving them the power now to decide what they want to focus on. So that's another area we've had a lot of success.
Wonderful. What's the recommended time for working with the exercises between sessions? How often and how long?
Typically just in the beginning, 5 minutes a day is all. As we get more complex, people can do more. I mean, a lot of my clients, they'll work, for 20 minutes or half an hour a day on them. Again, the more you do it, the better. It just depends how doing that. In fact, that's the hardest thing, right? Is remembering to practice. So I encourage them to stick it on the wall by their desk, put it in the bag, wherever it needs, so they can see it and practice. But it's minimally 5 to 10 minutes a day is all it really takes to reinforce what we do in the lessons.
Sounds incredible.
Yeah, it is.
Not a whole lot of time to lock in those benefits. And then I would imagine, like most things, if you do it multiple times a day for 5 minutes, it's even better.
Yes, exactly. And that's where that speed drill comes in so handy, because it's like the one I call the speed drill is only about, I've had people start at 2.5 minutes when we started, and they get down under a minute pretty quickly. So we're talking about 1 or 2 minutes, and that's the one they can do anytime during a day when they need a little quick kind of mental refocus, speed up. And then typically most people will go through the harder exercises in the morning. It's a great time to start your day.
Excellent. Well, so in in the big picture, if you look over at the conversation we've had and you think, okay, here's a whole segment of what we do we haven't even mentioned, what would that?
That's a good question. Probably, I alluded to the family a little bit. I know that one of the issues a lot of times when people are trying to recover, right, is finding caregivers, professional caregivers and so forth. The nice thing about this is it's something they can do with their family. So they can do it at home with their family. Their therapist obviously is doing it. We found that was very effective when the Marines came back from deployment, right? It's always a hard adjustment to go from combat to normalcy again. And when they would do these exercises with their family, they really, really enjoyed that. In fact, even now, whenever I work with a military unit, it's been a while with the military, I would always donate a family night so the guys could do it with their families, and then everybody benefits. So it's kind of hard to buttonhole it, right? It's not. Is it a therapy? Is it a performance improvement? Is it? It's kind of hard to buttonhole it, but over the last 15 years, any way you can think of it being delivered, sitting out in a desert with the Marines or in a big conference, it doesn't matter the format or even the person starting person. The one thing I would say is I kind of have a saying. I don't work with comfortable people. So
say that again.
I don't work with comfortable people. So if someone is happy where they are, I'm happy for them. But if someone's really struggling, and that could be someone with a concussion, or it could be a sales guy who's suffering, someone who is suffering and is willing to work hard to get that edge, I'm for them. Or or people who are already high performers, like a professional athlete, looking for that edge, like Kat, looking for an edge above, and they're willing to do the practice, then I love helping people like that. I've had people every once in a while say, hey, this looks like pretty cool what you're doing. Let's start working together. And then after a session, they're really not interested. They said they're happy. They're making a lot of money or whatever makes them happy. And so I'd rather spend my time with someone else.
That's I hadn't heard it put that way before. I don't work with comfortable people. That's interesting. Most psychologists could say the same.
Yes, of course. That's right. That's why they're getting the help they need. That's right.
Well, so how do people reach you? What's the best way for them to reach out to you?
So one more time, I forgot. I should have mentioned this. One of the things we've developed this and actually just tried it out at a conference recently. That same robust stimulation approach, it's not part of the mental efficiency piece, but we found a way that we can actually help people change their habits in less than an hour. Typically there's all kinds of wonderful books about changing habits, and there's a power of habit and all these different things. If we apply the same process we use to make the brain faster, defining what we want to do, applying robust stimulation, which engages all parts of the body and brain, and an agile approach to adjust it as you go forward, it's amazing. When I speak at conferences now, I ask anybody have a habit they want to change, right? And we walk through the process, and I get an email from afterwards saying, you're absolutely right. I was able to change my habit in less than an hour. So I would throw that out as well. We're just starting to add that now to the program because it's become so helpful for people.
Well, now you're just going to slip that in, right? You're just going to say,
yeah, I forgot when you said.
If anybody's got a habit they don't like, we can fix that. But just a little afterthought, right?
Yeah, that was the area that I wasn't talking about. I suddenly realized that, yeah, that's a big area we're starting to add. Yeah, absolutely.
So is that a separate thing from the combat brain training, or?
Well, I actually integrate it with the combat brain training. We always start with the brain first, faster, more focused, better decisions under stress. And then as people give me feedback at different areas, because we always want to kind of customize the brain training to areas you're struggling. For example, for athletes, like with a basketball player or a tennis player or a golfer, we'll integrate the motions they use in their sport into the brain training. So now we're making the connections from the brain to the parts of their body they need to be successful, unconscious. So, but a lot of times I always ask people as we progress about the habits. And so now I'm adding that to the whole brain training piece as well. And it's been
so is that like is it like a separate module that you apply?
Now, yes and no. So my overall program that I'm working on, actually book I'm working on now, it's called Blow Your Mind, an agile approach to hacking your brain in 30 days. And so we have a cognitive piece, which is the brain training. We have the habitude piece, which is the habits. And we're applying that same approach to attitude, which is mindset. And so we integrate all three of those together. It's an extremely, extremely powerful program. So it's, in one sense, the habitude might be a separate module in the overall program, but it's such a useful thing for people. I've been adding it to the brain training as well. Because in a way, we are training our brain, but everything we do, repeat, a habit even, is because we're changing our brain to repeat that action.
Absolutely. Well, and I learned in college, I had a professor who said, "Do you want to get a good score on the graduate record exam?" I said, "Sure." He said, "Well, you come in here 3 nights a week and give me 2 hours of your time, and you do whatever I tell you to do." And I said, "Okay." He said, No, you're going to take it lightly. We're going to shake hands on this. And if you don't come here, I'm flunking you in the 2 courses that you're taking from me. It was kind of hardcore. And so I said, "Okay, come on. I'm a man of my word. That's fine." So then I went there as a, senior in college, thinking I'm going to be taking the graduate record exam. So I'm going to be doing all these high level things. He gives me a grade school math book, simple addition, 1 digit to 1 digit. Work through this book. I went to protest and he said, "Oh, you agree?" And I spent several weeks, 6 hours a week, 2 hours, 3 nights a week, working through those math books, simple addition and then subtraction and then simple multiplication and simple division. I thought he was crazy. And then when that was done, he interspersed that with, "Here, read this intro psych book." Now, this is on top of all the other classes I was taking and all the other, and he had me read 3 intro psych books cover to cover and answer the questions in the back. And they were all covering the same material. But I noticed my intuition went up. I noticed I would get popped in these creative ideas like never before. I noticed one time I was driving with my car, it made a funny noise, and I instantly knew a spark plug was off. And I wasn't a mechanic. It popped into my head. I go, I wonder, could that be? And sure enough.
Wow.
Very
so cool.
I know that idea of making the brain do things actually increases the brain's capacity.
Right. Speaking of math, one thing that most parents, a simple thing they could get their kids to do to help them in all school, go back to memorizing times tables. We don't do that anymore, right? Kids don't memorize time tables. I remember in 6th grade, my teacher over Easter break, we had to do the full set of times tables, write them out every day. Of course, I waited the last minute, procrastinator, right? So I did them all. For the rest of my schooling, I knew my multiplication, and it made everything so much easier, right? Because just that repetition of something as simple as that. Now, neuroscientists, by the way, I didn't mention this concept. I use it a lot in my work. Neuroscientists call the shifting of conscious thought to unconscious thought a zombie system. I guess this was a Crick, and I can't remember his partner, but basically, maybe they watch horror movies when they're kids, right? But zombies are out to get you, but they're not thinking about it. And so if you think about the first time you learn to drive a car, all that mental effort, just keeping the car on the road without killing anybody. Now you drive a car without thinking about it. Same amount of effort, but because our brains are lazy, it offloads it to a zombie system. And so same thing, you start repeating this stuff over and over again. Like you're saying, now your brain doesn't have to think about it. You had that intuition because your brain knew what it needed to do. And that's what we're trying to create with this, is make the thinking process a zombie system.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, let me ask one more time. How do people reach you if they want to connect?
So I have 2 websites. I have one, mentalperformanceinstitute.org. The only reason I put that up there was for the medical conferences they wanted me to speak at. It's got some background and so forth. But most of my work now is by referral. So if people go to combatbraintraining.com, it's just a placeholder. There's my email and a QR code where they can set up a meeting with me. And if they go there and they're not comfortable, they want to get better, just tell me what they're struggling with, and we can set up a face-to-face or free face-to-face meeting, and I can discuss their situation with them and how I can help them.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for taking time to be with us. It's a fabulous set of work, and I look forward to following your work and making some connections between you and several people we've done podcasts with already.
Yeah, you got some fascinating people in there. So yeah, thanks. And thanks for this opportunity. This has been great to spend time with you, Tim.
Thanks. Take care.
John Kennedy is a #1 international best-selling author. He's an executive brain coach, a consultant, and a trainer, and he's helped organizations, leaders in business and the military exceed performance expectations for over 35 years. John's innovative insights have been featured in numerous publications, and he's been interviewed in a wide range of radio, internet, and TV broadcasts. John has delivered keynotes and workshops all over the world for a variety of industries and branches of service. John's unique approach to improving operational and mental agility has helped thousands of people with his Combat Brain Training program. 100% of participants report significant improvements in performance in all areas of their lives. Clients include Marines, snipers, Special Operations Forces and their instructors, pilots, professional athletes, business leaders, students, children with learning disabilities, and those suffering from brain trauma, including traumatic brain injury, post-traumatic stress disorder, and concussions. All of these participants have had their lives positively changed by the program.
You've been listening to the On Your Mind podcast, offered by Journey's Dream, where we support people through mental health challenges to a place of true and lasting well-being. If you love our show, we invite you to visit onyourmindpodcast.org to join the conversation, access the show notes, and discover our helpful resources. Thank you for listening.